Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. On behalf of the National Transit Institute, I want to welcome you to today's webinar. Thank you for participating. The National Transit Institute develops, promotes, and delivers training and education programs for the public transit industry in the United States. Today's webinar is National Transit Database, Annual Reporting for Indian Tribes. And we are very pleased to have as our presenters today, Bailey Krause and Courtney Springer. Bailey Krause joined the NTD team in 2014. She's a graduate of Michigan State University and currently serves as the lead analyst for rural transportation programs for the National Transit Database. And Courtney Springer joined the NTD team in 2015. She's a graduate of the University of Virginia and currently serves as a senior validation analyst for the rural reporting module of the National Transit Database. During today's presentation, you can ask a question at any time by typing it in the Q&A box. If you do not see the box, you can enable it by clicking on the Q&A box on the Zoom controls, which are most likely at the bottom of your screen. If you have not already printed out a copy of the presentation that was emailed to you, I will be pasting the link in the chat box in just a bit. I will now turn the presentation over to Bailey Krause. Bailey?
Thank you, Samindra. I really appreciate that. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for the 2022 presentation for travel reporters. If you have any questions as we go through the presentation, please feel free to use that Q&A box as Samindra mentioned. We'll get to your questions as soon as we can as we go throughout the presentation. All right, let's get this started. All right. As a disclaimer, the contents of this presentation are intended to provide clarity regarding the existing requirements of the FTA and NTD. Please always feel free to refer to the statutes and regulations for requirements. The goal of this webinar is to identify changes for the upcoming report year and to provide an overview of NTD reporting requirements and how to apply those requirements to the system. Again, this is courses designed specifically for Indian tribes. All right, the agenda for this afternoon. First, we're going to do a quick overview of the NTD. Then we're going to move on to important changes and clarifications for the 2022 report year, which are not very many. Next, we're going to review the fundamentals of NTD reporting. We'll discuss how to get started in the NTD reporting system. And then we'll move on to how to kick off and complete the annual report. And we're also going to include some common reporting challenges just to clarify some items we get throughout the year. And then lastly, we're going to review how to submit your report and the closeout process. So lots to do, a little bit of time. All right, here's the contact information for the National Transit Database. If at any point you do require any technical assistance while completing your report or accessing our published data files, please feel free to email our help desk. Support emails found here. You can also contact your analyst. We can generally point you in the right direction as well. Again, the presenters are myself, Bailey. I'm sure you've probably heard of me or heard from me in the past, as well as Courtney, and you're going to be hearing from her in a little bit. In addition to our contact information, we also wanted to provide the Fta Program Contact here, who are Thomas Coleman and Michidoni Smith. In addition to the contact information for everyone, as you've seen, we wanted to also provide these key reference documents. They're mostly reported here, included here. So this really includes the policy manual, that USOA that we do reference throughout the presentation, as well as the manual, the glossary and user guide. There's also a very handy FAQ in the NTD website, so definitely use that as well. That would be very helpful. Okay. First, a quick overview of the National Transit Database. So, what is the National Transit Database, or NTD? NTD was established to be the nation's primary source for information and statistics on all public transit modes in the U.S. It's a source of data for performance measure benchmarking, as well as research in the transit space. So who is reporting to us? Who do we talk to every day? Well, you all, which are those recipients and subrecipients of Chapter 53 funds. So these recipients are required to report to the NTD. Reporters may include those that have received funding in the past or are still required to report based on continuing grant requirements, or for those that wish to receive it in the future and will report voluntarily. If you do report voluntarily, please keep in mind that all reporting requirements will apply to you. So why do you report? Well, you're required to report because of those grant requirements I just mentioned. So you're gonna come to us, you're gonna ask us some questions, and we're gonna get you through the report. All right, so data from the NTD is used for several things. Some examples include performance benchmarking, like I mentioned before, research and statistics program, formula apportionments, which are usually those that are pretty important, and reports to Congress, as seen here. So the reporting deadlines for this year are October 31st, January 31st, and April 30th. These are the same that are every year. Don't know why I said this year. Every year, these are the reporting due dates. So this will depend on your agency's fiscal year end date. The deadlines are closely monitored, and if you do have any questions on when you need to report, please reach out to your analyst. If you think you're supposed to report in one area, but we're telling you it's due in a different time period, please let us know. We can work together to get that result very quickly. Okay, now we're going to go into the changes and clarifications for report year 2022 that may affect your report. First, we're going to discuss the census. So census is something we brought up last year, potentially. So it's going to be this year. So later this year, the Census Bureau anticipates the release of the updated census data. So based on the most recent census, which was completed in 2020. This information may change how you allocate data between urbanized areas if you allocate to them. Usually in tribal space, we're seeing between state lines. Not quite sure the state lines are going to change. So you may not be affected. Probably only a handful of tribes may be affected by this. So until this data is released, however, all FFA 10 forms, which we'll be going over later with Courtney, will be unavailable. You're going to continue to report the data in the other forms as usual. You just won't have access to that FFA 10, which we'll go over later again. All right, so once that data is released, FTA plans to release a task that asks your agency to see if you are affected by any changes. In the task, you're going to update the demographic information as applicable based on the new data. More training on this will be provided later this fall, as noted here in October. Probably going to be more applicable to the urban one because of that FFA 10, but we'll make sure to have something very targeted. Okay, moving on from the census, condition assessments are the next item that we will review. In ROA 2021, you may have remembered that all condition assessments were required to be reported to the NTD as that last year of the TAM plan cycle. So starting this year with report year 2022, the new TAM plan cycle begins. So that means that all condition assessments that are more than 4 years old must be updated on the A15. So condition assessments are those that are completed on your facilities. Courtney will be going over that in a couple minutes. Okay, next you may have seen this towards the end of last year, but the unique entity IDs replaced the DUNS number for reporters. So instead on the P10, instead of the DUNS number that you're entering, you're going to see that unique ID instead. So the information was ported over from sam.gov last year. So we're just going to ask you to review your P10 information located in your agency's profile this year. Make sure everything looks correct and that your mailing address is correct as of where your transit headquarters is, your physical address. So make sure that's correct, and if it's not correct, that will need to be updated through the sam.gov account. Okay, so that was really it for the clarifications for this year. Not too much, not too heavy. So we're going to go ahead and jump into the Ntd Fundamentals. So we're going to be covering modes, type of service, revenue definitions, and just a quick overview of financial information. Okay. Here on this slide are the most common modes for rural reporters, demand response and bus. So bus service is powered by a motor and fuel contained within a vehicle, and it includes those that have route deviation, point deviation, or deviated fixed route. Point or demand response service is defined as scheduled service in response to calls from passengers like a dollar ride. So no scheduled stops. Scheduled stops means bus. Got it? Cool. All right, another popular mode in the rule module is the commuter bus mode. We see this, every so often for tribes here and there. So we do receive a lot of questions on what is considered commuter bus mode versus regular bus service though. So we did want to clarify that commuter bus service operates with more than 5 miles of closed door service, basically no stops, and the same type of vehicles are consistently operated on the service. If you do think you have both bus and commuter bus service, please keep in mind that the vehicles shouldn't be used between the services on the same day. And this also applies to the driver's work assignments, which are typically separate. If you are currently reporting both commuter bus and bus service, and you believe you may only need to report one of those two modes, please contact your analyst for assistance, and we can help determine how it should be reported and provide steps on how to change this in the reporting system if appropriate. Not a big deal. So if you do have any questions about any of these, please reach out to your analyst. We are more than happy to help you. We are here to help. All right, moving on to type of service. So we're talking about the modes. So now we're talking about the type of service. Currently in Ntd, there are 2 main types of service. So directly operated and purchase transportation. Directly operated is when the service is operated by the agency and uses the agency's employees. Purchase transportation, on the other hand, is when vehicles are operated by the seller's employees and the service is branded as the buyer's. The buyer is paying the full cost of the service. So you're paying for everything that service is doing for you. And then within the purchase transportation section, there is TX for services operated by a taxi provider and TN for services operated by a transportation network company or TNC. If the service is operated by a contractor that is neither a taxi provider nor a TNC, the type of service would just remain PT or purchase transportation. So it's more the catch-all, and then we kind of get more specific under purchase transportation to make sure we're capturing, the data accurately. All right, so we're going to be talking about a lot of abbreviations throughout this presentation going forward. We just wanted to make sure that we're commenting on it as we go to make sure everyone's like on the same page. You'll just hear a lot of acronyms in the Ntd. So these are the data points as well as the abbreviations that are used. The service or these data points are collected on a per mode and per type of service basis, except for sponsored unlinked passenger trips, which are only collected by the demand response mode. So you won't necessarily report sponsored unlinked passenger trips that go on a bus. If they went on the demand response service, you would make sure to account for those. Okay, we will talk about a lot about revenue service going forward, which is when the vehicles are transporting passengers or are able to transport passengers. This includes layover and recovery time. Revenue service does not include deadhead, driver training, school bus or charter service, and vehicle maintenance. So you're asking, hey, you know what's deadhead? So as mentioned on the previous slide, deadhead is not reportable within your revenue service. So this will include leaving or returning to the garage, yard, or facility, changing the route, or when there is no expectation of carrying passengers. There are detailed tables found within the Ntd policy manual which provide further examples of what is and what is not considered revenue service, and we'll review a couple of those in the next couple slides. Before we get to those though, did want to have a quick reminder, emergency services are not considered public transit and should not be reported to the Ntd. If you have any other non-passenger service like meal delivery, those services are not reportable to the Ntd as well. So a meal is not a passenger. Those miles shouldn't be reported either. 4 hours. We did have a couple questions about meal delivery services within the last couple of years and whether or not the services provided under the delivery is reportable. If the meal delivery does not include active transport of passengers, the service data is not reported. If you are using 5311 funding for the meal delivery, the funding would be reported on the RR20 as funding. but the amount of that was spent on the mail delivery service specifically would not be reported under the mode's expenses. So this may mean a mismatch between your funding and your mode expenses. I know this is just all theoretical, but when we get through the RR20 and the operating expenses and the funding sources, it's a little bit clearer. Okay, I also wanted to go over the basics of public transportation service. So public transportation is open to the general public, which includes the branding, program brochures, and the website show prominently how to ride the service and the details behind it. Another factor is that it has to be shared ride, as mentioned here. So neither the rider or the driver can deny the use of that empty seat to another passenger. Sticking point. Okay, I mentioned a couple slides ago, we wanted to review the demand response service, what is and what is not. These are located in the policy manual. It's usually around page 80 or so in the reduced one. It can change, a little bit year to year. So this is just a very, very good one to say, a good point to say, what is and what is not. So vehicle waits for a passenger at pickup point. You're not moving, so no miles, but yes, revenue hours, you have the expectation of carrying that passenger and starting to carry that passenger. So just please note, the really big one is that the time of the miles from when the vehicle is dispatched from the garage or to the pickup point are not considered revenue service until they've reached that pickup point. On the end of that example, the time of the miles from the last drop off back to the dispatching point is also not considered revenue service. So, just look through, see what is, see what isn't. This is a good thing to share with your drivers as well to make sure that everything's getting accounted correctly. And this would be for the bus mode. So the bus mode is slightly different, but the same parallel of, from the garage to the first stop is not considered revenue service. And then from the last stop back to the garage is also not considered revenue service. Those two are kind of like the main reference points here. Okay, so let's see here. If you had temporarily suspended shared ride during the pandemic, it is still reportable. However, this is only if it's temporary. It still needs to meet the other public transportation requirements. If the service has been suspended, just please make sure to add details as to how long it was suspended in order to help us in providing a clear picture of your service changes. So we kind of know, what to ask, what not to ask, or if there's just a complete data, something's missing or something's added. All right, unlike passenger trips. So we went through, what is and what is not vehicle revenue miles, vehicle revenue hours. So another point of service that we are collecting every year from pretty much everyone, unlike passenger trips. This should represent the number of passengers boarding during the reporting period, and they are counted each time they get on the vehicle. So no matter how many vehicles they use from their origin to their destination, they should be counted each time they board that vehicle. When reporting the UPT on the RR20 form, this should be the total number of passenger trips, both those regular trips as well as the sponsored trips. And I know, sponsored trips is our next one. These are trips that are paid for in part or in full by a third party. These may be part of a coordinated human services transportation program. So common sponsors of these are the VA, Medicare, and assisted living centers. So again, this is not client-based. This is those third parties paying for, these trips. As mentioned in the last slide, sponsored UPT should be reported as a subset of the total unlinked passenger trips for all demand response modes. We do see sometimes where people will enter, their total trips, but it's actually less than their sponsored unlinked passenger trips. So they just haven't added them back together and they're separating them out. So if that happens, it's fine. We'll catch it and we'll get it updated. Okay, another service data point that is reported by mode and type of service is VOMs. VOMs are vehicles operate an annual maximum service, and they are the number of vehicles an agency operates to meet that annual maximum service requirement. That's a lot of words to say. How many vehicles do you have on the road on your busiest day in the peak season, during the peak season of the year? So if you have 3 vehicles and 2 are running at max during the year, your VOMs are 2. So again, this is not the amount of active vehicles or highest number of vehicles available, but rather the max amount used by them at the same time to provide that service. Great. I think you guys will get that one. Another important definition is accrual accounting. So we're going to kind of switch gears a little bit and start talking about expenses and finances. So Ntd reporting requirements for financial data follow generally accepted accounting principles, or GAAP, and accrual accounting. If there are conflicts between GAAP and Ntd reporting instructions and requirements, please follow Ntd rules. In accrual accounting, the revenue is recorded when earned, regardless of when the payment is received, and then expenses are recorded when the liability occurs, regardless of when the payment is made. So here's an example of how that works. So you're going to make sure that you record that expense as well as the funding that will pay for it in that fiscal year you're reporting. So if the expense occurs on December 31st and you have that as part of your fiscal year, you're going to make sure that that is in your report for report year 2022. Got to think about what year we're in right now. All right, another important, well, the first type of expense, and we'll just jump right into it, is operating expenses, which these are the day-to-day expenses that a transit agency incurs. These may be for operating and maintaining the vehicles, maintaining other equipment, planning costs, admin costs, as well as other examples seen here. So your day-to-day items that everyone has to pay for. All right, next up, it's a type of operating expense is capital assistance that's spent in operations. Way to get more in depth. All right. So these are costs associated to the purchase of equipment. So when I'm talking about equipment, it means an article of non-expendable personal property having a useful life of more than 1 year. Equipment will have an acquisition cost, which equals the lesser of the capitalization level established by the government unit. So you all, so if you have a, $1,000 limit, then it's $1,000 and up, or $5,000 determined by FTA. Did I skip ahead? I skipped ahead. I'm so sorry about that. So preventative maintenance is basically capital assistance spent on operations. I apologize. Just let me redo that. So basically, purchase of tires, preventative maintenance is capital assistance spent on operations. You'll see here that it's under the 5311. I believe it's under 5310. So it has a different match. So that's why it is reported on a separate line other than the normal 5311. And it'll also have it under tribal. All right, capital expenses. So again, I apologize. I got ahead of myself. So acquisition costs more than $5,000 or whatever your capitalization level is established by your agency. So usually these are vehicles, maintenance facilities, equipment, etc. I've already talked about it. We'll move along. All right. If for operating expenses, if your agency has more than one mode, the operating costs will be broken out between the modes based on direct and shared expenses. Once the direct expenses for each mode are identified and broken out, the remaining shared expenses may be calculated between the modes based on a cost allocation method. Please note that this is only acceptable for shared expenses that are not tied to a specific mode, as there should be some expenses that are direct to each mode. Usually direct to each mode may be if there's like a specific person that only works on the bus mode, then their salary could be tied to it. If there's anything more specific or like dispatcher, maybe only for the demand response mode. So just try to find something that's attributed to one or the other, so you can try to have as much direct expenses before you allocate the rest. Okay, when reporting data to the Ntd, you'll report the funding you spent, not the amount your agency was awarded. So here on the slide is an example of an agency that was awarded $275,000, but they only spent $178,000. So this agency would report the $178,000 instead of the $275,000 that was awarded to get the true cost of the service for that specific year. All right, we'll mention capital responsibility multiple times through this presentation with regards to the asset module. So please see the list here to determine whether or not your agency has direct capital responsibility for an asset. As a note for the third bullet point, an infrastructure asset itemized as a capital line item in the budget does not necessarily mean an agency has direct capital responsibility. An agency must also have management or oversight responsibilities for that line item project, because we do see this sometimes. In addition, performing minimal preventative maintenance work doesn't necessarily indicate you have direct capital responsibility for that asset. Great. All right. So we're skipping on to the narrative report. So another, big thing is this narrative report that's been due since 2018. So this is due every year for an agency that's submitting its own plan. If you're under a group plan sponsor, this would not apply to you. If the state is your group plan sponsor, you didn't have to fill this out. So the narrative report may include any changes in the transit system that may affect progress towards the targets and how you determine the targets. The report will be uploaded to the A90 form. It's usually a Word document or a PDF, depending on how you do it. And it's just going through your targets and having a narrative of how everything changed from year to year. All right, so next we're going to review the Ntd interface and user account management. All right, the Ntd homepage is found here. So it's transit.gov, or transit.dot.gov/Ntd. So this is where all the data products are housed, policy manuals, clickable link to go to the reporting system, as well as that FAQ I was talking about earlier. So just anything and everything under the sun is here for us. All right, so you're going to click on that link, and then you'll come to a login page. So you're going to click on if you're an external user, click this to log in from the Ntd page. So that's going to prompt you to go to login.gov. So please make sure when you are setting up login.gov that you are setting it up with the same email address that you are using for Ntd reporting. For login.gov, they have their own help desk. They have their own set of people to assist you with this as well, but we can definitely help you out with certain items. So in addition to the password you set, you want to set up at least one secondary authentication method, and the options are shown here. So whichever one that you feel comfortable with is what you can do. All right, so once you get past login.gov, you will log into the Ntd Reporting Tool, which is Appian platform. So you may see a different amount of options. So you'll probably see Ntd spaces, you might see trams, you might see another one for all I know, depending on what systems you have access to within Appian. So here you're going to select Ntd in order to access your report. And if you would like to automatically go into Ntd every time you log in instead of going to this home page, you can start it as seen here to make sure you go straight into it. So the Ntd homepage was redesigned, I think, about 2 years ago now, but it does allow you to access your report directly from the first page when you log in, which is pretty cool. All right, you can toggle between your annual reports, your reporter profiles, you can view any of your announcements, so it's a little bit more cohesive. All right, so across the top you see Home. Right next to that is the Task tab. So this section houses your important tasks, such as your report year kickoff, incomplete forms, or incomplete submissions. So you usually will not see that much here. To access your annual report forms from that homepage, you'll click on the annual tab. That's important because annual means that is your report for the year. It will populate any open Ntd reports for your agency. You can access the form one of two ways. You can either click on the Ntd ID with the folder icon on the left, which will direct you to the report package summary page, which will also allow you access to related actions on the page. So related actions you'll see later, that's how you submit your report package through that. If you'd only like to edit the forms, you can click on the pencil icon on the right-hand side of the page, and the system will take you directly to the clickable list of forms to edit. All right, so this is where you can get to the profile though. So you're gonna just skip over monthly and safely. Doesn't apply to travel agencies. So to access your reporter profile, you'll still want to ensure you're on that homepage, but instead of clicking on annual, make sure that profile is selected. in your agency's profile will load. The profile is where you will get to edit your mode, basic agency information, as well as view other users from your agency. So to view the individual forms, you'll click on the pencil icon on the right-hand side of the page, which will allow you to access to the profile forms, and to access the other profile options, you'll click on the Ntd ID folder icon on the left. So it's the same idea as the annual form. You can either edit just the forms or you can edit everything. All right, so if you do click on the folder icon on the left, this is what you're going to see. This is the profile summary page. This is the same thing you've seen in previous years, nothing's updated here, but this is where you can go to related actions to edit the P forms or profile forms for, these. From next to the summary page, you'll see the e-file library. This is where you can filter through communications from prior years as well as this report year. So this is where you can review your closeout letter if you wish to from years past. Okay, next to the e-file is the form library. This is where you can see the data you've submitted in years past. You can use the drop-down to select the package and then the link in blue for whichever form you want. So this is if you want to just do a quick form review and just say, I just want to look at my R20 from last year. You go over here, you look at your closed out version of your form, and then you click on it and it downloads as an HTML. All right, so in addition to viewing the forms under the form library and just doing that one form, you can also go to the related actions tab of the profile and print the entire year's package in full, rather form by form. Other actions you can do through related actions are view and manage those P forms that I mentioned earlier. Right, so if you do choose to print that annual package, this is a pretty popular item, you'll go to that clickable link, as I mentioned, and then you're going to be taken to a new page where you'll click on the refresh button under the link until the link comes up for you to download the profile. So you will have to click refresh after you select the right package, and then it will transition you back to this form, and you're going to have to click on that view printable version of the form, and it'll have like within the minute that you updated it, but it's not necessarily hidden, but it kind of blends in a little bit right there where that red arrow is pointed to. All right. Next up, we are going to cover users and user management. So to access the system, you first need to be a user in the system. So to add users, each agency must have a user manager. A user manager may edit and add other users to the agency, as well as the UM may also fill out Ntd roles such as CEO and Ntd Contact. So it's very important to get this. If you need a new user manager, no problem. Be more than happy to get you updated. You have a form, send it in, and your analyst will be able to update for you. Okay, the most important users to have on that account, though, are going to be the CEO and the Ntd Contact. So the CEO is usually the director or CEO of the agency, and will be the one submitting the original submission of the report. The Ntd Contact will be the main point of contact for the analyst to reach out to. However, usually if we're reaching out, we'll reach out to both the Ntd Contact and CC the CEO, just so everyone's in the same loop. After the first submission of the report, the Ntd Contact may then submit any subsequent revisions the report may need. It's just that first one, again, needs to be completed by the CEO. Agencies may have an unlimited amount of editors and viewers, but there can only be one CEO and one Ntd Contact user. So just make sure you have one of each, or at least one of those, especially the CEO. You need a CEO. Great, okay. If you're already a user in the system and you need to unlock your account, there are two different ways to complete this. You can either unlock your own account if you've set up your security questions, which we'll go over in the next slide, or you can submit an unlock request. If you do submit an unlock request, the request will go to the user managers on your profile. And you know what, you're like, hey, I'm the user manager. So either go to the other user manager on your profile, if you do have one, or to your analyst for processing. So if that happens, you're like, I really need to get in now, I don't have another user manager, feel free to submit that unlock request, send an email, give us a call. We get alerts and we try to process these as soon as possible. But if you really want to get it done, feel free to just email your analyst and we'll get it unlocked immediately. Okay. But it is important to note sometimes you will be able to log into the system even if you're locked out. So you just won't see your packages. You won't see anything because you're locked. So if you're logging in, you're like, I can't see anything. What is going on? You're probably locked out. And follow the steps, get unlocked. You can be rocking and rolling again. Great. Okay. So again, let's see here. If you set up your security questions beforehand, you won't have to submit the unlock request. To set those up, you'll go to the top right-hand corner of your screen, as seen here, and then select profile, then related actions, then manage security questions. From there, you'll be able to follow the steps to set them up, and you'll be able to unlock yourself. Great. It shouldn't take long. It takes about 2 minutes. Okay. Now we're going to jump right into reporting and the report year kickoff and really the meat of this entire sandwich of life in NTD reporting. So a report year kickoff is there for agencies to set up the report package for the year that they're reporting in. So this is something that you'll do every single year. All right. So to start, the CEO delegate, and the Ntd Contact will have access to this task after the fiscal year has ended. So if your fiscal year ends 6/30, 7/1, there you go. Rock and roll. Get your report year kickoff done if you want. Let's see here. That user will select the task from the task menu and then accept and then proceed. So you'll see accept is in blue. As soon as you click on that accept button, that blue proceed button in the lower right-hand corner will go to that blue and you'll be able to click it too. From the first step is to verify the users. You can view this information here and then ask your user manager to update what is necessary after the kickoff is complete, as only the UM had the privileges to add or remove usage on the account. If you're like, hey, I need a new user manager, at that point you contact your analyst and we get that started, as I mentioned before. Okay, after clicking continue on the previous page, you will confirm your modes. This will either be the ones you have reported on in the past, or if you need to, you can add new modes at this time. Huge reminder, huge reminder. If you do not take anything else, please take this. Do not enter an end date to a mode if the mode is still operating. The end date should not be your fiscal year end date. That end date means I am not reporting the service. I will not report the service any longer, and it is done. So please don't enter anything there unless it absolutely is done. This affects your form, so let's just not touch it unless you've actually ended your mode. Great. The next step is managing your transit asset management sponsor. So I talked briefly about A90 and group plan sponsors. So this is where you'll enter that sponsor if you have one. If you do not have a sponsor, you will click continue and leave the sponsor area blank. So this is an example where Washington State was selected and they're going to hit continue. However, you can remove it and say, you know what, they're actually not my sponsor. You can remove it, leave it blank, continue on your way. Okay, if you did not select a sponsor last year, there would be one where you can select one. Again, if you don't have a sponsor and you complete your own plan, just click continue. The next kickoff step is to confirm your reporter type for the current report year. This should be pre-filled as seen here. You'll click on continue to go to the next step. So this is for 2022. So you're confirming that, 2022, yes, I am a small system reporter. I am a tribe. I do not want to change. So no. 2023 report. I know it looks exactly the same. So this is for next year though. So we're asking you, hey, next year, do you envision you're not going to be a small system reporter reporting as a tribe? You're going to say, I'm not going to change my type. I'm going to keep selecting no. So you're good. You're going to hit submit. Okay. The last step is clicking continue on that last page and then okay. So after you click that okay, you'll be notified your report year kickoff is being completed and your forms are generating. This could take a couple minutes as the packages are populating one by one, so please just be patient. It could take 5 minutes, it could take 1 minute. It just kind of depends on what other things are going on at the time. So after your kickoff is completed and your forms had generated, you're going to have to actually now go into that system and enter your data. So we're going to go really quickly into how to access those forms and what the forms you will see, and then I'm going to turn it over to Courtney in a couple. All right. So from the homepage, you're going to select that agency's fiscal 2022 report to gain access to that report. So again, you can either click on the left or the right, as we mentioned earlier. On here, you're going to land on the summary page. So we clicked on the left with the folder icon. So from here, summary page. Next, annual forms. So click on that annual forms. So the packages, as you can see, the identification D10 is in black. Now it is in blue. So you want to see blue forms in order to be able to update them. That is an important thing. Just a little small tip. Make sure they're in blue before you try clicking. So page is going to reload, form names. So you're just going to click on them one by one. You cannot right click to open up in a new tab. You have to open one at a time, save it as you go, and then close. So we'll kind of go from there. Okay. So these are the general forms that a tribal agency will report on, and of which Courtney will be going over in a moment. They're separated by types of forms. So basic forms will be those B forms. Asset forms will start with an A, and then the reduced reporting form, which holds the service, financial, and safety data, is called the RR20. For such a deceptively small name, it's the biggest part of your data report. And then, of course, you have the summary forms for the FFA 10 as well as the D10. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Courtney so she can go over what each form contains and details how to fill them out.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Bailey, for that really great and comprehensive overview for the NTD program and the reporting policies. So good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Courtney Springer, and I will be taking us through how to complete the 2022 annual report. The first form we will discuss is the Basic Information D10 form. The first section in this form is general information. So please ensure that your organization type is selected as option number 13, which is tribe. Please also answer whether your agency receives or benefits from Chapter 5307 Urbanized Area Formula Program funds. The answer to this question will typically be no, but please contact your analyst for further discussion if you think you should select yes for your agency. The next section is demographic information. Check to make sure that your primary UZA is correctly listed, which is the primary state in which your service runs. Be sure to add any applicable secondary UZAs in case your agency operates in more than one state, or if it also serves an urbanized area. If the secondary UZA field does not apply to your agency, please go ahead and just disregard it. Next is the tribal demographic information section. If you completed an NTD report last year, this section will automatically populate with the tribal area you selected last year. So please just check to make sure that this is correct or add any additional tribal areas your agency serves. If this is your first year completing a report, then select Add Tribal Area and begin typing your tribal area, and the system will auto-populate options for you to select. And if you're unable to locate your tribal area, please go ahead and contact your analyst for further discussion. The auxiliary sections on the B10 form typically do not apply to most tribes, so do not select modes filing a separate NTD report unless you are paying for a separate transit service that is not included in your report, and also do not select separate assets unless another agency reports your agency's assets in their NTD report. If you do have any questions regarding these sections, again, please contact your analyst for discussion. The next form we will discuss is the Contractual Relationships B30 form. The B30 form captures information for purchased transportation contracts with other agencies. It identifies logistical specifics of the contract as well as some basic financial information regarding the contract details. The NTD has specific requirements for what constitutes purchased transportation. One is that the buyer of service should report this information if it meets the following criteria. One is that the buyer must pay 100% of the full cost to provide the service. Another is that the service must be operated in the name of the buyer, meaning the service must be branded as the entity paying for the service. The seller must also operate and manage the service on the buyer's behalf. The full list of purchase transportation criteria is provided in the Ntd Reduced Reporter Policy Manual, which can be found on the Ntd program website. If you completed a B30 form in last year's report, this form will automatically populate in this year's report again. If you need to add a new contractual relationship form, the first step in this process is selecting whether the agreement is with another agency who reports to the Ntd or if it's with a private company. Select it and hit continue after making your selection. If you select Ntd Reporter, you must identify the contracted agency from a list that's generated from the Ntd database. Complete the contract summary section on the left side of the page. The required fields are contractual position, type of contract, primary feature, service captured, and fares retained by. There's also an optional section for you to report whether the buyer of service provides any public assets to the seller, such as vehicles or maintenance facilities. If you are unsure of how to complete any of these fields, please refer to the Ntd policy manual or contact your analyst. The next section refers to this agreement's key financial and operation statistics. Begin by selecting the Add New Mode and Type of Service button and select the appropriate mode or modes for the contracted service. Complete the financial and operating data fields as shown here. We're not going to review each of these data entry fields during this presentation, since not everyone completes the B30 form in their annual report. Again, as I said before, if you have any questions about specific fields on this form, you can always refer to the policy manual, or again, you can always contact your validation analyst. Once you have completed this form, select Save and Validate. If the contract has been terminated this year, you can remove the B30 form from your report package by selecting the Remove Contractual Relationship button at the bottom of your report package summary page. Some tribes have relationships with a local transit provider in which the tribe contributes an annual subsidy amount in exchange for the provider extending its service into the tribal area. In this case, the tribe does not cover the full cost of the provider's service, and it doesn't operate or purchase other modes. So if this situation applies, you should select the subsidized option under contract type on the B30 form. So for example, let's say a tribe pays a local transit provider a fixed amount of funds per year to operate a bus route extension. The provider adds multiple stops along one of its routes to service the tribal area, and the buses are all branded as and managed by the provider. In this case, the tribe is not covering the full cost of service and would report this agreement as a subsidy. As another example, let's say a tribe contracts with a private company to operate the tribe's demand response services. The tribe covers the full cost of operations, brands the vehicles as tribal transit, and manages all of the scheduling and dispatching operations. So this agreement meets the criteria for a full cost contract, and the tribe would need to report the service as a purchased transportation agreement. Next, we will discuss the stations and maintenance facilities A10 form. The A10 form represents your agency's passenger stations and maintenance facilities. For fixed route modes, such as motor bus, a section for passenger stations will appear at the top of this form. So here you'll report the total number of ADA accessible and ADA non-accessible stations, as well as the total number of escalators and elevators if applicable. But please note that passenger stations must be significant structures in a separate right-of-way and typically include functions like ticketing, restrooms, concessions, or an information desk. Bus stops or simple bus shelters do not constitute passenger stations. In the next section, report the type and number of maintenance facilities your agency utilizes for public transit service based on the vehicle capacity and ownership type for those facilities. The definition of maintenance facility is a garage or building where mechanics perform routine maintenance and repairs and typically serves as operating garages. You should not include bus barns in this count, nor should you include any third-party facility where you would bring your vehicle for work, such as a Jiffy Lube. If one maintenance facility is shared by 2 or more modes, you should report an allocated share between the respective modes' A10 forms. This could be based on any data point that indicates how much of the facility is used per mode, but one of the most common approaches is to allocate the facility based on the number of vehicles it services. So to look at an example, let's say an agency owns one facility and operates both a fixed route bus service and a demand response service. The maintenance facility services vehicles for both modes, and the agency owns 10 vehicles in total. The fixed route bus mode runs 4 vehicles, and the demand response mode runs 6 vehicles. In this example, we would expect to see 0.4 reported in the bus A10 form and 0.6 reported in the demand response form. Please ensure that the total number of your facilities reported across all A10 forms equals a whole number. Next is the Transit Asset Management Facilities Inventory A15 form. A15 form collects basic information on facilities that your agency uses to supply public transit service. On this form, you should report administrative and maintenance facilities for which your agency has capital responsibility. However, you should report all passenger and parking facilities that your agency uses in public transit service, regardless of who has capital responsibility for those facilities. Some common examples of facility types are administrative buildings, combined administration and maintenance facilities, and just standard general purpose maintenance facilities. Please note that if your agency reports a maintenance facility as owned on the A10 form, we would generally expect to see that facility to appear on the A15 form as long as your agency's use for that facility is greater than incidental. If you reported facilities in last year's Ntd report, those facilities will automatically pre-populate in this year's form, which means you will only need to either add new facilities or update existing facilities on an as-needed basis. To add a new facility to this form, select Add New, followed by Add Facility, and this will allow you to begin entering data for the facility. There are 3 sections for you to complete when adding a new facility: facility information, condition assessment, and address. And again, if you are unsure of how to complete any of these data entry fields or have questions about any of the definitions in this form, you can always refer to the Ntd policy manual, or you can always reach out to your analyst for clarification. If your agency does not have any reportable facilities, you should select the No Data to Report checkbox just to confirm this service characteristic. You should not attempt to save this form without either reporting facilities or selecting this checkbox. The A30 revenue vehicle inventory form is where you report all revenue vehicle data categorized into vehicle fleets. Again, if you completed this form last year, your report year 2021 revenue vehicle inventory data will pre-populate here. So again, you'll only need to report new fleets as needed or edit existing fleets as needed. You can enter new fleets by selecting the Add New Fleet button, or you can edit an existing fleet by selecting the blue RVI ID link for that fleet towards the left side of the fleet grid. When adding a new fleet, you should complete all required fields. If you have 2 or more vehicles that are exactly identical across all characteristics, you should group those vehicles into a single fleet. And after you have finished updating this form as needed, select the Save and Validate button. One common reporting question that we get a lot relates to the difference between active and inactive vehicles. So transit agencies must report the number of active vehicles in the fleet as of the end of their fiscal year. Active vehicles provide regular service and includes spare vehicles, as well as any vehicles that are temporarily out of service for routine maintenance. Inactive vehicles may include any of the following: vehicles that are awaiting sale or disposal, vehicles that are in storage or are part of an FTA approved emergency contingency plan, or vehicles that are out for long-term major repairs. As a reminder, please remember to mark vehicle fleets as retired in the reporting system if the vehicles have been sold or disposed of, rather than deleting the fleet. So to retire a fleet, you'll update the number of active vehicles to 0. And after you input 0 into this field, you'll see a question that says, is this fleet retired, appear in the form, and you should select yes. Fleets should only be deleted if they were added to the form in error, or if you are deleting a duplicate RVI ID after using the add existing fleet function. And just as a quick note, if your agency purchases new vehicles and retires old vehicles within the same fiscal year period, please ensure that you retire the old fleet and add the new fleet as a separate RVI ID. So in other words, please do not update the old ID with the information with the new vehicle fleet. Okay, the next form is the Service Vehicle Inventory A35 form, which reflects an inventory of service vehicles that support your agency's transit service. Agencies are required to report service vehicle fleets for which they have capital responsibility. Service vehicles include cars used for administrative staff, transit police cars, tow trucks, service trucks, and other support vehicles. Because service vehicles must be roadworthy in order to be reported, agencies should not report vehicles like small forklifts or golf carts or any type of construction equipment that's not roadworthy. This form works in a similar manner as the A15 form. So to create a fleet, you'll select Add New. And please ensure that you report revenue vehicles on the A30 form and service vehicles on this form, the A35 form. In other words, you should not report vehicles on the A35 form if the vehicles are used to transport passengers. If your agency does not have capital responsibility for any service vehicles, again, please select the No Data to Report checkbox. Similar to the A15 form, you should not attempt to save this form without either reporting service vehicles or selecting this checkbox. Report the service vehicle fleet information for this fleet. You'll select the vehicle type from a drop-down menu, which consists of 3 options: automobiles, trucks and other rubber-tired vehicles, and steel wheel vehicles. Just please note that automobiles are passenger cars up to and including station wagons in size. If you have a service vehicle that is a minivan or anything larger, please report them as trucks and other rubber-tired vehicles. Estimated cost is the most recent estimate of the full cost to replace the fleet. If you do not have a recent estimate, you may report the original cost of the fleet or its insured value. You must also report the year that corresponds to the dollar value that you report. Save and validate the A35 form once you're finished. The next form we will discuss is the Transit Asset Management Performance Measure Targets A90 form. The A90 is where an agency or an agency's group plan sponsor reports the portion of assets that have met or exceeded the useful life benchmark of that asset. This will show the target that you reported last year, the current performance that's pulled from the current year asset forms, as well as a place for you to report your target for next year. For vehicles on the A30 and A35, the performance measure is determined by the vehicle's useful life benchmark. And for facilities on the A15 form, the performance measure is determined by the condition assessment. Some agencies report their targets directly to the NTD, whereas others are participants under a group plan sponsor who reports one A90 form on behalf of all participants. The first section of the A90 form is rolling stock, which refers to the revenue vehicles that you reported on the A30 form. You should report performance targets for active revenue vehicles, again, for which you have capital responsibility. And you should also select NA or not applicable for any vehicle types that do not apply to your service. The second section is equipment, which refers to the service vehicles you report in the A35 form. This section reflects the 3 vehicle types represented in the A35 form, which we discussed a moment ago, which are automobiles, trucks and other rubber-tired vehicles, and steel wheel vehicles. You should complete this section in the same way that you complete the rolling stock section, either report a target for next year or select the NA checkbox. The third section is facilities, and it contains your agency's targets for the facilities that you reported in your A15 form. You should report the percentage of facilities that you expect will rate below a 3 on the term scale as of the next fiscal year. And finally, at the bottom of the form, you should upload your narrative report document, which is an annual requirement. Your narrative report should outline the targets that your agency set in this A90 form, your agency's progress towards those targets, as well as any changes within your transit system's operating environment. The narrative report document should be uploaded and submitted with your annual report. Next is the reduced reporting RR20 form, which contains the highest volume of data in the Ntd report. When you open the RR20 form, the section Total Funds Expended will appear at the very top of the form. And this is a non-editable running total of all of your agency's various funding sources, which Bailey discussed earlier, like fares and federal grant programs and local funds. We will also go over the various funding source categories momentarily. So the sum of your funding sources should match the value that you enter for total funds expended by mode and type of service, which is again a number that you manually enter as shown by the circles here. And as another reminder, financial data should reflect funds that were expended during the fiscal year and not funds earned. Agencies that operate more than one mode are required to capture and report actual expenses by mode and type of service and should not allocate their total operating expenses. If your agency operates more than one mode, you should first determine which expenses are direct and can be easily traced to a specific mode, which may include driver wages or vehicle repairs. For the remaining joint expenses, which are incurred for the benefit of more than one mode and cannot necessarily be traced to just one mode, you can allocate those remaining costs. So an example of this may be a transit manager's salary that supports both the demand response mode and the fixed route mode. So you can allocate that shared cost using an allocation factor such as vehicle revenue miles, unlinked passenger trips, vehicle revenue hours, or number of employees. The next section of the RR20 is fare revenues. This section also begins the various funding source categories in this form. So fare revenues include all income received and expended directly from passengers, including donations made on board the vehicle. Fare revenues are broken down between passenger paid fares and organization paid fares, and they're also broken out by mode. Passenger paid fares are those that are traditionally considered as passenger fares, in which a passenger pays to board the vehicle. This category includes the fares listed on the slide here, including adult fares, senior citizen fares, and student fares. Organization paid fares are those that, again, an organization pays for or pays through a third party on behalf of the passenger. One common example is a university that pays a transit agency to allow students to ride fare-free. Please note that Medicaid funds should be reported in this form as an organization paid fare. If your agency operates more than one mode, you are required to capture and report the fares by mode and type of service. There are certain exceptions to this reporting requirement, which are listed here. If your agency's fare policy happens to fall under one of these exceptions, definitely please notify your analyst during validation. But in most cases, you should report actual fare revenues by mode. The next section is other directly generated funds. This is where you should report advertising revenue, donations, insurance recoveries, and really any other non-fare directly generated funds. If you report funds to this field, you'll see that a text description box will appear. So please ensure that you provide a description of these funds. The next section is revenues accrued through a purchased transportation or PT agreement. You should report funds to this section if you receive revenues from another agency that pays for the full cost of a service that you provide, as long as it meets the NTD definition of purchased transportation. This is really a rare selection for agencies, so please discuss this with your analyst if you believe you should report new funds to this field. And if you do happen to report new funds, your analyst will likely ask for more information just regarding this particular purchase transportation agreement. The next funding source category is non-federal funds. So you'll enter this data based on what funds your agency expended from local funds, from state funds, and from other non-federal sources. Local sources include tax levies, general funds, and finances from local entities. State sources include state programs that support public transit. And if you report other funds, you must provide a text description of the funds. Again, a text description box will appear once you enter funds into the other funds field, so you can provide your description there. In the next section, federal funds, you'll need to select all applicable federal funding sources from the list of programs. And so once you select a box, the corresponding data entry fields will populate to the right. Please note that the various 5311 COVID-19 relief programs are separate line items in this section. So please report any such programs in their respective data entry fields. If you report funds to any other category, such as other federal funds or other FTA funds, you will be required to provide another text description just to describe that funding program. Examples of other FTA funds include those not listed already in the form, such as Section 5308 FTA Clean Fuels Program. Examples of other federal funds may include Housing and Urban Development or HUD funds, or any other non-FTA federal source. Other US DOT funds will include funds that come from the Department of Transportation that are not FTA funds, such as the Federal Highway Administration. As I mentioned a moment ago, the CARES Act, CRISA Act, and American Rescue Plan Acts are listed separately in the federal funding section. So please note that there are two data entry fields for each of these programs. There's one for the 5311 Rural Area Program Funds and one for 5311 Public Transportation on Indian Reservations Program Funds. So please ensure that you report your agency's expenses from these programs to the correct field. The next section in the form is annual service data. When reporting miles and hours, you should only include those miles and hours in which your transit vehicles are operating in revenue service, which, as Bailey described earlier, is when vehicles are transporting passengers or have the capacity to transport passengers. Unlinked passenger trips should reflect each time a passenger boards a vehicle and should include personal care attendants who ride fare-free. And please note that while you report sponsored service unlinked passenger trips for certain modes in a separate data entry field, the total unlinked passenger trips should represent all ridership for the year, including both regular and sponsored trips. So in other words, you should not deduct your sponsored UPT from your total UPT. The safety data section is the last section of the RR20 form. The thresholds for reporting reportable incidents, fatalities, and injuries are listed here. Regarding fatalities, please note that the fatality must occur within 30 days of the event and must result from a transit-related event. So for example, if a passenger suffers a fatal heart attack while riding a transit vehicle, but there was no transit-related safety event such as a collision, then this would not be a reportable incident. And regarding injuries, the injured person must be transported away from the scene for immediate medical attention in order for it to be reportable as an injury. If you do not have any safety data to report for the year, these are required fields in the form, so please enter zeros into all three of these fields rather than leaving them blank. If your agency reports a tribal subsidy agreement, meaning your agency subsidizes a local provider service and does not directly operate or purchase any other service, you will see a reduced version of this form. You will not report service statistics from this service because this data will be captured in the provider's NTD report. So you should only report the funds that your agency contributed to the provider for this service. The next form in the report package is the Federal Funding Allocation Statistics, or FFA-10 form. The FFA-10 form allows agencies to allocate their vehicle revenue miles between multiple rural areas and/or urbanized areas as needed. The majority of tribes who report to the NTD operate in only one state, so in these cases, you should allocate 100% of your data to that area. If your agency operates in 2 states, you will need to report the service performed in each. Reporting data by area is critical because it impacts the amount of funding FTA apportions to those areas. This is the layout of the FFA-10 form. The form automatically pulls data that you reported in the service data section in the RR20 form, as well as your value for operating expenses. So the first step in completing this form is to select your UZA reporting method. And if you only operate within one state, you should select actual vehicle revenue miles as your UZA reporting method. If you operate within more than one state, you can select actual vehicle revenue miles, or you can select actual data or other. If you only report to one UZA or non-UZA, the total should always match the data from other forms column to the left, which is, again, the data pulled from the RR20 form as shown by this line. If you report data to multiple areas, the allocated percentage should always add up to 100%. If you save data to the RR20 form and then complete the FFA-10 form, but later revise the RR20 form again, you will then need to go back and update the FFA-10 form based on the latest revision. And the last form we will discuss is the CEO certification, or D10 form. The D10 form is divided into 2 sections. The first section is overall accuracy, where your agency's CEO attests that all data captured in the NTD report is accurate and truthful and up to date. So you'll select the header for the unlinked passenger trip section to continue on to the next section. The second section is the unlinked passenger trip data section. And here you'll select the method that your agency used to collect unlinked passenger trips from the drop-down menu, and then you'll save and validate this form when completed. So that was an overview of each report form in the annual report package. And so next we will discuss some common reporting challenges that agencies may face while completing the annual report. Reporting challenges can take shape in a variety of ways, including understanding the NTD policies, completing data entry correctly, completing all required forms and fields in the report, as well as addressing the validation issues. One of the most common challenges relates to validation questions that analysts attach to the report during the revision process. Analysts send reports back if they have follow-up questions regarding your data, and validation can really include, but is not limited to, time series checks against your agency's historical data, logic checks between data items on different forms, and checks for values that may fall outside the typical industry range. To resolve any validation issues, agencies can either revise the data if the data does require a correction, or you can provide a text explanation that addresses that validation issue. Tribes who report to the NTD select the tribal area or areas that their agency serves each year. This should be confirmed or updated each year depending on potential service changes. And the third tier of the tribal transit program apportionment is based on tribal area. Some reporting issues that may arise include erroneously excluding areas that are served or erroneously adding areas that are not served. Another common reporting issue relates to allocating operating expenses. We've mentioned this a few times throughout this presentation, but as a reminder, agencies may not allocate their total annual operating expenses. Rather, they must first determine which expenses are direct costs and attribute those costs to the appropriate mode, and then they may allocate the remaining shared costs to each mode and type of service afterwards. Another reporting issue relates to year-over-year funding changes. So agencies must ensure that all funding sources that are used for public transit, including funds that are used for local match, are reported in the correct lines on the RR20 form. So that is to say, agencies should report all funding sources that they use to support their public transit services and not just the funds that come from federal grant programs. Agencies should only report service data for when they are performing revenue service. Revenue service does not include deadhead, and so therefore deadhead should not be included in the data that's reported to the NTD. Deadhead is when transit vehicles are operating closed door and do not carry passengers. So this can include leaving or returning to the garage, as well as heading to or from the starting or ending points of revenue service. But it can also include changing routes or when the driver does not have the duty to carry passengers generally. Excluding deadhead from NTD data ensures that key performance indicators such as revenue speed or cost per mile and cost per hour are all accurately reflected for your agency's service. Additionally, vehicle revenue miles is an apportionment formula factor for 5311 funds, so this data is validated closely. Vehicles operated in maximum service or VOMs refers to the number of revenue vehicles your agency operates to meet the annual maximum service requirement. Agencies might erroneously report 100% of their active vehicle inventory as their VOMs, and this would be correct if your agency operated all of its active vehicles during peak service during the year. However, agencies may retain spare vehicles that do not necessarily operate during peak service times. So for example, if your agency has 15 active vehicles and the highest number of vehicles on the road during the year was 12, then you should report 12 VOMs, not 15. If the VOMs you report on the RR20 form is identical to the number of active vehicles you report on the A30 form, your analyst may ask about this during validation. When reporting a new vehicle, it is typical that an agency will report the corresponding capital expense on the RR20. Capital expenses are related to purchasing a capital asset, such as a vehicle, or making an improvement to a capital asset that increases its value or useful life. One validation issue that comes up is that agencies will report new vehicles on the A30 form without reporting the capital expenses on the RR20 form. Additionally, please note that when you report capital expenses for a vehicle that's used for more than one mode, you should report the full expense to the predominant mode that uses the vehicle the most, rather than splitting the capital vehicle cost between modes. Agencies must inventory the vehicles that they use to provide public transit service on their A30 if the vehicles have not been sold or disposed of at the end of the fiscal year. The inventory should represent a snapshot of the last day of the fiscal year, and the vehicles must be reported in that fiscal year when they become available for service. When completing the A90 form, agencies must report performance targets for all assets for which they have capital responsibility. Common reporting mistakes on the A90 form can include reporting this year's target in the field for next year's target, or not reporting a realistic target percentage. Once you complete all of the forms, you will need to submit the report within the NTD system. So please note that saving and validating the D10 form does not in itself constitute submission of the report. To initiate the submission process, open the report package and select related actions. Please note that only the CEO or CEO delegate can submit the original submission or first draft of the NTD report, and the Ntd Contact can submit all subsequent revisions. So in the related actions menu, select Submit Annual Report Package. If all the data is filled out and there are no issues preventing you from submitting, then you will see this page and you will click on Continue to Submit. And following submission, you will be taken back to the Related Actions page. Once you submit the report, you will need to complete a couple more steps in order to completely close out the report for the year. After you submit the report, your assigned validation analyst will review the entire report for accuracy and consistency. So he or she will compare the data in this year's report to the data submitted in last year's report to look for any significant changes, to ensure that all forms have been completed, and to check to see that the data has been reported to the correct fields. If your analyst asks about any data changes or service changes from last year to this year, please avoid providing generalized responses such as the data is correct, as these types of responses do not really offer an explanation for the data change. So please try to provide specific responses to validation issues. The more information or context you provide early in the reporting process, you can help reduce report turnovers before the report is closed out. Once your analyst has reviewed the report, he or she will return it through the system so that you may resolve the open validation issues. But as the report revision count increases, the revision time period will decrease since the report should have fewer and fewer issues with each submission. If any data issues were noted in last year's closeout letter, be sure to address or correct those items in this year's report. And if you fail to correct any issues stated in the prior year closeout letter, those items may be marked as questionable in the current validation year. This is the summary page of a report package. This table lists the number of open issues as well as total issues. You will want to focus on the number of open issues, since open issues will prevent you from submitting the report. The table also shows which forms have been validated, which appear as green, and non-validated, which appear as red. Each report form has a regular save button, as well as a save and validate button. If you save and validate a form, the form will again appear as green on the summary table. However, if you make changes to the form afterwards, you must save and validate the form again. If you make changes to a form that has already been validated and you hit the normal save button, the form will revert back to red and it will not turn green until you save and validate it again. There are two ways to view your validation issues. The first way is to open an individual report form, such as the RR20 form shown here, scroll to the bottom of the page, and then click on View Issues to review them. The other way is to review your issues from the report package summary page. You'll select View Issues from the top right-hand corner of your report package summary page, which will open a page that contains all of your validation issues in your report across all forms. After selecting View Issues, a new page will appear with a list of your open issues. If you click on the issue line item once, it will highlight in dark blue, and after the issue highlights, scroll down to the page to review the issue's language. After reviewing the language, you can either comment in the comment box with an explanation and save your response, or you may choose to click on View Related Form at the bottom to make any updates needed to the data. Notes in the closeout letter will typically relate to incomplete reports, which could mean either the data does not conform with NTD definitions, accounting principles, or it could mean that the agency did not adequately respond to validation issues raised by the analyst. If you respond to a validation issue and notice that your analyst has kept the issue open with a follow-up question, please avoid copying your original response and pasting it as your follow-up response. Please also avoid copying and pasting the same response for multiple validation checks if the checks are asking about different service characteristics. All identified issues must be fully addressed in order for the issue to be resolved. When any of these issues occur, FTA cites them in the closeout letter. The best way to resolve validation issues is to provide thorough and detailed explanations that give your analyst a clear picture of your agency's transit service. You can explain why the data changed from year to year, or what service changes took place to cause a significant increase or decrease in the data. If you happen to find that last year's data was incorrect, please provide the correct value if you happen to have it, or provide an explanation for why it was wrong or why this year's data is correct. Please note that FTA does not accept this response for multiple report years. So here is the contact information for our team, as well as the NTD Help Desk, which is open Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you again for joining us today, and I will turn it back over to Solandria to close us out. Thank you.
Thanks, Courtney, and thank you everyone once again for participating in this webinar. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to Bailey and she can connect you to your analysts. A special thank you to Bailey and Courtney for their very informative presentation. Everyone, you will be receiving an invitation to fill out an evaluation for this webinar. We always appreciate your feedback. Also, this webinar is being recorded and will be available on NTI's YouTube page in a couple of weeks. A link to that page will be included in the evaluation email. Thank you all once again, and be well.